Welcome, everybody. We're thrilled to have you here today for our webinar on medical device testing with a specific emphasis on compliance with 21 CFR Part 11. But before we dive in, there are a couple of housekeeping notes I'd like to share with you. Today's session is brought to you by Mecmesin, a proud member of the Physical Properties Testers Group, or PPT for short. PPT Group is a collective of leading brands in the field of physical properties testing, offering a wide array of solutions for tensile testing, compressive strength, torque, textiles, and the effects of shock and vibration, amongst other parameters. Our sister companies within the PPT family include Lansmont, James Heel, and Alluris. For more details about the group or any of our brands, please visit the PPT website. I will also share a link to our events page in the chat box for your convenience. Then focusing on Mecmesin, we have established technology labs across the US, UK, and Asia, dedicated to supporting our customers with education, proof of concept, and demonstration testing. Should you have any specific needs in physical properties testing, our global team is at your disposal to provide the assistance you require. Let me introduce the team for today's webinar. Moses DeRocha is our presenter, and I'm Sharon Smorenberg, one of the coordinators. Additionally, we have support staff stationed across Asia, Europe, and the Americas, ensuring that no matter where you are, we have a local expert ready to support you. We're aiming for a dynamic and engaging webinar. Therefore, we encourage your participation through questions. Feel free to submit any questions you have at any point during the webinar using the questions box. We will address these questions during the Q&A session at the end. This webinar, as always, is being recorded. The recording will be sent to you within the next day or so from the webinar having taken place. So you're more than welcome to share the webinar or the recording of the webinar with colleagues or whomever might find it of interest. Now, without any further ado, I'll hand it over to Moses.
Thank you, Sharon, and thanks everybody for making the time for our webinar today. As Sharon previously introduced, my name is Moses DeRocha. I'm going to be your presenter today, and we'll be talking about medical device testing. Now, there is such a wide range of capabilities in the Mecmesin group for medical device testing. However, we'll be focusing on just 3 for today, and also more importantly, how our testing software actually complies with FDA's 21 CFR Part 11. So we'll be looking at syringe actuation testing, which is the break, loose, and glide force testing application, needle sharpness testing application, and also CRC, or child-resistant closure torque removal testing. So fasten your seatbelts, and let's get the show on the road. So as a quick primer, I know every time you hear medical device testing, and especially if you're in the pharmaceutical or medical industry, testing embodies a whole different meaning. But for purposes and in the context of physical properties testing, we're really referring to force testing, which is either tension or compression, push or pull, and also torque testing, whether it's closure and or removal torque testing. Again, for purposes of our demo, medical device testing is not a chemical or biological test, and it is more of a non-medical testing of physical properties of medical devices. It's not intended to diagnose or cure anything. It's pretty much, as the name implies, a physical test of the properties of any device, whether it's syringes or needles or bottles or caps and so on. Our agenda for today, as previously noted in both our abstract for the webinar and in the introduction, is we will be looking first at the importance of medical device testing in general, and then we'll take a quick brief look at syringe actuation testing, and then we'll look at needle sharpness testing, and then CRC, or child resistant closure torque testing. And then finally, we'll delve into what our capabilities are for compliance with 21 CFR Part 11. At the end of the presentation, we'll also look at certain general factors that affect consistency and repeatability in any testing environment, especially and more critically in the medical device and pharmaceutical testing environment. Now, each of these applications, as they've been referenced here, are going to be their own full webinars. It's going to be a whole hour live webinar on each of these, which means for purposes of our demo today, this is going to be more of an introductory procedure. We'll just kind of touch on what those applications entail, the type of testers we usually use for those applications, and not delve into the details per se. Hopefully then we'll be able to dedicate more of the time to our approach to how our software actually complies with all of the statutes in 21 CFR Part 11. So why is medical testing important? Now, again, we look at medical testing under a wider umbrella of physical properties testing in general. For research and development to determine product viability, the strengths and weaknesses of the product, for quality control, establishing product standards for quality and safety, for production, for maintaining product quality and safety, and for supplier audit, for verifying quality and safety. In instances where a producer does not supply their own material for production, usually you'll get data on what the strengths and the weaknesses are on the products that are supplied. Your ability to test to verify that those values actually do meet your actual standards is very important. And so that's one of the reasons we would recommend medical device testing. The role of medical device testing in everyday life. Now, it does sound very abstract when we say, oh, it's physical properties testing, but what does that really mean, either to a producer or to a medical professional or to a consumer or patient in this case? Again, for the most part, setting a standard for testing usually involves finding what an ideal value or what your quality limits are on what you would consider a good product or an ideal product. So we use a simple Goldilocks rule on a too little. If we took syringes, the needles, for example, too little, the too little force, meaning it will bend before it actually penetrates skin, and also too much where it's so dull that you'd end up breaking the actual syringe before you actually penetrate skin. And also the ideal obviously is the needle is sharp enough to, one, penetrate the elastomer to draw out the product, and also maintain the sharpness to actually puncture skin to deliver the medication. So again, sometimes it's just a matter of convenience. Sometimes it's a matter of safety, life and death. In cases of child-resistant closure testers, is it easy for grandma to get into her medication container, and also harder for little Joanne to not get into the same container? So this is critical. Again, if you look at it from the standpoint of convenience, that's easy and you can ignore. But from the standpoint of safety, your brand's reputation is on the line, and failure is not an option. So syringe actuation testing. This is essentially in compliance with ISO 7886-1. I believe that's an Annex E. It is simply the measurement of the force profile associated with expelling fluid from the syringe barrel. That force profile refers to the break loose, which is that initial peak force when you first push on the plunger, and then the average force after that initial peak as you continue to deliver the product. This test can be performed on both empty and pre-filled syringes. Even though the standard was technically written for plastic syringes, we have also seen this used on glass syringes as well. Ideally, the testing environment that's usually used is a motorized controllable tester that is programmable. and also a syringe actuation fixture. Now, the creativity about the syringe actuation fixture is now because there's so many different sizes of syringes, as far as the barrel sizes, the diameters, and so on. You can essentially have a general fixture that attaches to the base of the tester, and then you'll have multiple dies or attachments that accommodate the different sizes of syringes, so you don't have to kind of constantly change that whole fixture. And then more often than not, there is a simple compression plate that actually comes down and pushes on that plunger. And then obviously, more importantly, the testing software. Now, this type of setup allows the operator to run tests where it's, as consistent as possible. Software, the test runs at the same speed, it runs to the same displacement, and then the computer automatically generates the test results, yielding both the break loose force and the glide force over however many different samples you need to test in however many batches you need to test. This is a more consistent and repeatable way of doing things than any manual way or having an operator dependent procedure that generates all kinds of inconsistencies and errors. Right. So that's essentially, in a nutshell, what our syringe actuation testing application entails. Needle sharpness testing, on the other hand, is the measurement of the force required for a hypodermic syringe needle to pass through the elastomeric cap used to seal a vial and also to pass through the skin. Most parenteral drug products are manufactured in glass vials or phials and then sealed with an elastomeric rubber stopper and a crimp cap. You'll find this in all types of different drug products. It is critical for the syringe needle to penetrate the cap and extract the product while maintaining the appropriate sharpness to subsequently inject a patient. So when we perform this particular test, usually we'll do a sharpness test where we'll either have an actual product that simulates that cap, the rubber, and also another product that simulates the skin. You'll find this, interestingly, there are stores that actually sell simulated skin for nursing students in practicing their sutures and so on. So what we do is we essentially, again, using a typical motorized tester, attach the syringe needle, come down, penetrate the bottle, measure the force resistance. In this case, a lower value indicates a sharper needle, whereas a higher value indicates a not so sharp or a dull needle, because then you get more force resistance that is necessary. And then after that, you move to a second part of the test where you penetrate the skin to make sure you get in similar values as you did. In this case, the lower values, which would indicate that the needles are indeed meeting your sharpness standard, whatever those are, depending on the actual size. I've seen different sizes of needles, size and diameter of the needle. So once again, the ideal testing equipment is the motorized programmable tester, a needle puncture fixture. Now, you can use, again, all kinds of different material that simulates skin, or as I mentioned, there's actual simulated skin that is used for sutures practice and so on. And then obviously testing software that allows you to configure and run consistent tests regardless of who the operator is or whatever shift the test is being run in. Once the test is configured, all the operator has to do, call up the test, put a sample in, hit the start button, and that essentially takes the operator out of the equation and minimizes the amount of error or inconsistencies that is seen in the test procedure. Child-resistant closure testing is a totally different animal. So we're going to shift now from the force testing to torque testing. As I mentioned in my introduction, we cover over 30 different medical device testing applications. We just picked these three because these are the most common we usually encounter in our day-to-day, but there are also additional testing for coefficient of friction, additional testing for peel and adhesion, additional testing for 3-point bend on needles, all kinds of different test applications. Now, the torque aspect of testing, there are two that we usually encounter. And as I've mentioned, any one of these applications is its own webinar where we could go a whole hour and walk through the different aspects of the test, look at what the actual test looks like in a live demo, and then kind of review what the data looks like in a real life test. The other torque test we usually do is a lure lock test, which complies with ISO 80369, which essentially measures the fitment of the lure to a syringe to prevent leaks and so on. But for purposes of our demo today, we'll just concentrate on the CRC test. Now, it's essentially simply a removal torque test that involves measuring not only the cap release torque, but also how much axial force is required to activate the cap release mechanism. So you'll find most of these containers that are push and turn. Now, you'll find this in both the medical device and the chemical industry, whether it's bleach or any dangerous chemical around the house, or sometimes even cosmetics that are, where we're trying to protect the little ones from having any contact with this chemical or medication. So it requires a certain amount of axial force to activate that release mechanism, and then a certain amount of release torque to actually uncap the container. Now, in the past, and still in use, was an impractical standard that required having a panel of children between 42 to 51 months of age, with a goal of an 80% of these children failing to open the package. Now, let's just say it's a dozen kids, you packed a dozen kids into a room, and let's say lunch was delayed, we can all imagine what the test results would actually look like. So it was, again, and that's, again, it's impractical. I'm sure you'll have results you could probably use, but it's also very subjective as far as the mental state of the kids, where they're situated, what the containers are like, what the testing environment is. So it does not really lend itself to the kind of repeatable and consistent testing environment that you would want if you were a medical device company that was looking to minimize any possible liabilities. So yes, that's still probably a test that people do, but if you're able to establish a more consistent and repeatable standard using a certified axial load, running the tester at a set rotational speed to a set angle, and then having the software automatically calculate the release torque values, you are in a more reliable testing environment, and you'll generate results that you can actually trust, as opposed to the more subjective test of using real life subjects, for that matter, or children in this case. Again, if you have kids between 42 and 51 have a knack of breaking expensive stuff. So, as my kid does. So, the ideal equipment for using for a CRC test, again, is apologize the spelling there, but this is actually our Vortex Pro tester, which essentially allows an operator to configure a test that runs at a preset rotational speed, runs to a preset testing angle, and then measures what that release torque value is. At the same time, we have calibrated weights that we apply on the top to simulate what the actual force is in applying that axial force to engage the release mechanism to get it to actually open. So if you do this the first time, it actually allows you to test different samples regardless of operator, regardless of the testing environment, over and over and over again. And the important part about this is, if you determine that it's 10 pounds of force, that's the ideal axial force required. Bear with me just a second while I make this correction. Since it's being recorded that way, when you get the video on demand, you'll have the accurate information there. So if it's 10 pounds of force that's required to open the caps, then for subsequent testing, if you randomly grabbed a handful of a dozen samples, and they were not opening with that 10 pounds of axial force, you should be able to identify right away that there's a problem with that axial force in the release mechanism. So part of this entire process is establishing a standard that's repeatable. and that also generates consistent results, which also allows you to set whatever your testing parameters are for pass and fail, and easily identify the samples that are passing and the ones that are failing. And the components will include the Vortex Pro tester, the calibration weights to essentially simulate what that axial force is, and also the cap chucks, which are more than often just custom made to fit the actual caps. And the reason for that is so you also have the flat bottoms that will allow you to apply that axial force. Now, for almost every CRC test we do, we end up coming up with customized chucks to fit the particular cup on each unique sample and so on. And then obviously the testing software allows you to configure the test for future use. Certainly, once you configure the test, all the operator has to do, put a sample in, put the weight on, lower the crosshead onto the cap, push a start button, run the test, and the software automatically generates the test results. So that's essentially everything that's involved in child-resistant closure testing. Now, obviously, I do realize that there are other containers now that also have a slightly different CRC mechanism that requires the pinch and open and so on. At a later date, if that's something you're interested in, please reach out to us and we'll kind of discuss our approach to testing those types of samples. But for now, we're looking more at the push and turn, which is more widely used in the industry. All right. So the next part of this is in all of these testing applications, it's important, especially if you're in the industry where you're FDA regulated, and that's always a serious business, right? So ensuring data integrity in FDA regulated industry means that whatever software that's being used is compliant with FDA CFR 21 Part 11 or 21 CFR Part 11. So we'll look at what that particular statute is in the Code of Federal Regulations. So first, this was established by the US FDA, or the Food and Drug Administration, to outline essential regulations for electronic records and signatures. The primary goal of this regulation is to provide clear guidance on maintaining the reliability and integrity of electronic records, ensuring robust security measures, facilitating effective data retention, and also enabling comprehensive audit trails. So compliance to this particular statute essentially means that organizations must implement policies and procedures specifically addressing electronic records and signatures. These guidelines should encompass the creation, modification, maintenance, archiving, retrieval, transmission, and security of electronic records within the system. Now, there are additional requirements that are not necessarily relatable to software. Things like, keeping where the computer is under lock and key, essentially. That's not always something that's software compliant. So for purposes of our demo, we'll look at the software compliance aspect of the statute. So data integrity, which is a critical aspect of compliance, involves maintaining and ensuring the accuracy and consistency of data throughout its life cycle, which means that the practice has to adhere to the ALCOA principle, which outlines 5 essential qualities. Namely, the data has to be attributable. That means it clearly specifies who performed the action and when. It's also legible by ensuring that the data is easy to understand, it's recorded permanently and preserved in its original form, that the data is also contemporaneous, as in it is recorded at the time the work is performed to maintain its relevance. The data has to be original. That means that we need to preserve the data in its original form or as a certified true copy to safeguard the data authenticity. And then finally, the data has to be accurate. That means that the policy has to guarantee that the data is error-free in accordance with established protocols. Now, the Vector Pro software has been designed with these best practices of the ALCOA principle, which in turn helps professionals achieve compliance with 21 CFR Part 11 as part of their quality system requirements. So now we will take a closer look at the Vector Pro software compliance. The most important part of the statute, as far as we're concerned, is the audit trail, right? Because again, data integrity means we need to know whoever created, modified, deleted the data. So that audit trail, or the comprehensive event log, which automatically records all actions and changes throughout the entire testing process. In the Vector Pro software, we've gone above and beyond what the statute actually requires, which means we're looking at not just being able to, the ability to filter by user or by action or by date or by test procedure when any particular action was performed. For example, if we wanted to find out all users that use the delete command, we would be able to find that out. But other than that, the system records every action with date and timestamp on whichever user was logged in that is performed in the software environment. The second part is also the versioning feature, which means essentially the test changes are saved with notes each time a test is modified from its original form and a new revision or version is created. For instance, if you ran a test, typical, let's say a CRC test, and you ran it initially at 10 revolutions per minute, but then you realize that running it at, say, 5 revolutions per minute of speed, a rotational speed, gave you more consistent results, and that was a little bit more similar to what would happen in real life by humans, then that original test modification from that initial speed of 10 revolutions per minute to 5 revolutions per minute would create a different version 2 of the test procedure. So when data is actually assigned, you have a batch of data that is designated using the original speed of 10 revolutions per minute, and then you have a different set with version 2 with a batch of data that actually references the modified test using the revised speed of 5 revolutions per minute. So the versioning system is important. And again, any reasons for that change is also recorded in that version. The next part is the electronic signatures. The software has an electronic signatures approvals feature, which replaces the need for manual or hard copy signatures, which is essentially what the statute calls for. The next part is user access, which is also critical to the statute. So user permissions can be configured directly within Vector Pro or using an existing Microsoft Active Directory or a compatible LDAP directory service. Now, user permissions are critical, as in different levels of users. So within the software, you can create individual users, and you can also create groups of users and then assign permissions based on what is expected of each group or user. So for instance, you could create a group of users for supervisors or administrators or QC managers, and then create a group of regular operators or morning shift or afternoon shift. So when you're assigning permissions on who can actually access a particular test, who can make modifications to the test, who can delete the test, who can make a copy of the test, and so on, you can assign those permissions either to individual users or to groups of users. When you assign each user to a particular group, you can then assign the permission to that group, and that applies to each user in that sense. So there are both system-wide permissions on what a user can do in the software, and there are also specific test permissions that allows each user or group of users access to any particular test. So you could essentially have, let's say, a verification test that is only reserved for the QC manager or administrators, and you could essentially lock everybody out of that particular test. So when users log in, they won't even see that test on their screen. So those are the different aspects of the permissioning in the software. Password options allow for administrators to set up users and assign passwords, and things like password complexity. What's the combination of letters and numbers and alphanumeric characters, symbols, and so on? What's the minimum number of characters that are expected in the password? And those are all policies that can be set in the password policy to make, essentially, according to the standard, make it harder to guess any password for the security of access. And then there are password reset rules where the administrator can determine whether a user can reset their own password, or if a user forgets their password, they always have to go to an administrator to get the administrator to reset the password. And then there are password aging principles that allows passwords to expire over a certain period of time that an administrator sets, whether it's every 30 days, every 60 days, every 90 days, and so on. There is also an idle logout when the system detects there's no test running or the mouse is not moving across the screen in the process of configuring a test. There is essentially no activity. The system will log the user out to preserve data integrity, so the user doesn't just get up and walk over to lunch and leave all the data just sitting there on the computer. So that time interval within which a user is logged out due to idle use can be set by the administrator, and it ranges anywhere from 5 minutes to 60 minutes. And then finally, there is the lockout rules, which means how many times a user is allowed to enter a combination of a wrong password and or username before a user is locked out of the system completely. At that point, they either have to reset their password if they have the ability to do so, or they have to reach out to an administrator who can then reset the password. And then there are also the electronic signatures, which we previously mentioned, which replaces the need for manual or hard copy signatures. And then to make it easier, we've also allowed the software to be incorporated with Microsoft's Active Directory. Software can be operated locally or via a company network. And the software security can be integrated into a company's domain and a common IT policy set for all users, where you essentially mirror a user's permissions within the Windows environment to the software permissions and so on. And also, by default, data is stored in a local database on the PC when you first install the software. But for enhanced security, there is an option to install Microsoft's SQL Server and have a more secure database. And this is available to purchase as an add-on module. All right, so I have also included, now there are several, there's a whole data sheet that kind of goes into a whole lot more detail on what all of these capabilities are. If you scan that QR code on your screen now, you should be able to access the page for our 21 CFR Part 11 compliance. And also, I believe my colleague Sharon will be sharing the PDF with you all attendees, so you can, you can access the documentation. And at any time, if you have any additional questions that is unique to your own testing environment, please feel free to reach out to us, and we'll be happy to answer those questions for you. Now, having looked at all of the above, what are some of the factors that affect consistency and repeatability in any given physical properties testing environment? So the best practices are: one, defining a testing objective. So we'll pick syringe actuation testing. Why do you even test that, right? So we have to determine that now the plunger being able to travel down the barrel of the syringe smoothly is critical to the testing application and for the smooth delivery of whatever medical product is in that syringe, which means if at any time there's too much friction or it's getting stuck, we have a problem. It may cause issues or discomfort to the patient, and all with it, the different liability issues that come with that. So defining what the test objective is critical. Why are we even testing? Now, once we define what the testing objective is, the next thing is to establish what the testing standard is. It's always easier if there is an existing ASTM or ISO testing standard that we're testing to, because then you'll have a whole layout of what the testing speed should be, what the testing parameters are, and what the calculations should include on exactly what kind of data is we're looking for in any given test. The next part of it, once all that's determined, is how do you go about it? And that's essentially looking at the process of selecting the appropriate testing equipment, which is usually a combination of the tester, fixturing, testing software, how the software is configured to make sure, even if you're testing to an ASTM standard, that you're actually meeting the standard, or even if you're using it as a guide and just testing to an internal standard, you have the appropriate equipment that not only accomplishes that goal of running a test from start to finish, but also makes it easy for operators to fixture those, and then that way you establish an SOP that allows everybody to test the exact same way. Then the next part of it, obviously, is part of selecting that appropriate testing equipment is also assembling the ideal grips and fixtures. Again, this is just as critical to selecting the testing application, the testing software, the testing system, and so on. Because if, for instance, you have the correct tester, have the software, everything else, however, your sample keeps slipping with each test because the chuck is a little too big for the cap or whatever the case may be, that always generates inconsistent test results. So we want to make sure that the ideal grips and fixtures are always present. Now, the Mecmesin Group has over 750 different grips and fixtures off the shelf, and also we always have access to custom fixturing for any unique products that you all might require. The next part of it is the developing an SOP for operators and staff. An SOP simply means a standard method of standard operating procedure that says we're all testing in the same environment. Everybody wash your hands before you touch the samples. Fixture the samples facing the 360 degrees. There are certain rules that need to be established, things that software cannot necessarily address that need to be established in that testing environment. Because as far as we're concerned, your ideal testing environment, in order to establish consistency and repeatability, also means the operators are all doing the exact same thing at the exact same time. Even if it's the night shift and they're a little tired, all they have to do is follow that SOP, fixture the sample in the way that it's supposed to be, and then run the test. If all of these boxes are checked and you're still getting inconsistent results, we always recommend checking the actual product for anomalies. I'll give you a quick example. In a CRC test, in applying the same axial load, running the same test program, making sure the samples are not slipping either on the chuck or at the point where the container is actually clamped, all these rules are followed, and yet we're consistently getting inconsistent results, as in results are all over the place. It's okay to take a look at the actual samples. So one of the issues that we encountered was the actual capper on the line was not applying a uniform application torque. And when that happens, regardless of everything you do in this list where you check these boxes, you still have inconsistent results. So it's okay to go back and say, hey, if this pneumatic capture, pneumatic actuated capper is supposed to apply 15 inch-pounds of torque as an application torque, is it really applying that application torque? If it's not, and that application torque is all over the place, then you can expect to have different removal torque values all over the place. There are also instances where even that extra friction in the threads on the containers might create some inconsistencies in the actual testing results. So when all else fails and you've checked off all the boxes on all the factors that affect the consistent testing environment, it's okay to look at the product. Sometimes that's always a sensitive topic because people trust their product more than they trust the actual machine that's calibrated, that's testing them. But these are all the different factors that we recommend in establishing a consistent testing environment. And at this point, I would like to turn you over to my colleague, Sharon, if you all have any questions. Over to you, Sharon.
Thanks so much, Moses. I really appreciate that. So now would be the time to collect your thoughts and to put any questions you still might have in the question box, and we will see that we answer them. And then while we wait, let me tell you about our next webinar. It will be a demonstration of needle sharpness and syringe actuation testing, and then obviously showcasing how that then can be 21 CFR Part 11 compliant. So please keep an eye out for that invitation. We should send it with this on-demand webinar recording, but if not, there will be a generic invite that goes out as well. Let me just double check if there are any questions here for us. I don't see any questions at the moment.
Oh,
And
okay.
if anybody still needs more information, like Moses says, you can reach out to him directly at moses.derosha@pptgroup.com, or you can use our generic email address, which is just info@mecmesin.com. Oh, wait, I have got an actual question. I just want to just give me a second, Moses. The
Sure.
question is, does it matter which is the speed of testing, either for penetration or the needle sharpness test?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So in any test application, what we're trying to do is simulate what a doctor or a nurse or a medical professional is doing when they actually administer medication using a needle. So there is such a thing as too fast or too slow, but at some point, best based on historical data we have and previous experience, there's a certain speed that can be considered too slow, which either causes discomfort to the patient, and then there is a speed that also might create a risk to the patient that is too fast. But anywhere between 5 inches to 10 inches per minute has been known to be ideal for any delivery of medication using a syringe and a needle. So yes, there is certain speeds that might affect the test. Again, you'll still get data, but how true is that particular speed to a real life application? So that's what we usually go for. Hope that answers your question. Back to you,
Thanks,
Sharon.
Moses.
No
There's
problem.
another question. Also, what kind of skin and membrane is used for needle sharpness testing?
So as I mentioned, if you could reach out to me directly, I have one that we usually, and essentially we'll actually be using one of these in our next webinar. It's just simulated skin. It's skin tissue or different layers that looks just like skin. That's what you can either use that, or there are other materials out there that simulate skin. That's of course if our coworkers don't volunteer as the test application subjects. But yeah, there are materials out there, and we'll be able to showcase some of those in our next webinar when we do the live demo, so you can see what that looks like. And it's the thing that comes closest to the real thing. And again, as I said, this is some of the stuff that nurses and other medical professionals use when they're training for how to prepare wounds and so on. Back to
Thanks,
you.
Moses. I
No
think
problem.
that's all of the questions that we have for today. So
Okay.
we will draw the webinar to a close and say that we hope to see all of you for our next webinar, which, as Moses says, will be a more intensive webinar, almost a bit shorter, but will include specific demonstrations. Wait, actually, there's another question.
Okay.
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 In medical device testing of
Mhm.
pre-filled syringe gliding force, which
Mhm.
is the best velocity to simulate a doctor's hands?
So thanks again for that question. That kind of mirrors the previous question. It's anywhere between 10 and 5 and 10 inches per minute. But one of the things we've done in the past is we've tried the different speeds, where let's say if you try it at 2 inches per minute, you'd realize it's a very slow delivery. And if you just put yourself in the shoes of a patient, and you're getting injected and this thing is just going slow as molasses, right? We love those nurses that don't even allow us to feel it. So just anywhere between those two speeds is realistic enough to simulate what happens in real time. But there's got to be a speed. Again, that always depends on the type of syringe. Is it plastic? Is it glass? What type of rubber is attached to the plunger? But you'll arrive at a speed anywhere between the range that I've just suggested here that gives you the most consistent result. And essentially that's all you're looking for, because it's going to be very difficult to do exactly what a doctor or a nurse does. But you're going to come close enough where you establish a testing standard, which allows you to do that over and over and over again in order to generate results that you can actually analyze. So if you're running all your tests at 8 inches per minute, and you see in your break and glide forces are consistent, but then you randomly pick a batch one day and those numbers are off, using those same test parameters, you should be able to tell right away, listen, there's a little bit too much friction in the barrel, there's something going on, there's too much air. You could figure out what's going on by seeing those values that are not consistent with whatever your previously set ideal test values are. Okay, any other last minute questions?
Yes, there is actually a last minute one, and
Cool.
I think it's similar to a previous one, but I'll read it anyway. Which types
Sure.
of material is used for penetration of syringe testing?
So I'll just add, that's very similar to that previous question, but I'll just add to it. So what we do, it's a two-step process. What we're trying to do is maintain needle sharpness after we've drawn out the product from the bottle, which means you're penetrating that rubber elastomer stopper, and then also injecting it into the skin. So we'll do both, and then kind of see what the acceptable sharpness value is once we've performed step one of the test and then completed step two of the test. So as I said, if you could reach out directly, happy to point you. If you're currently doing this testing and you'd like to get some material that you could use, please reach out to me and I'll point you to some of those materials that you can use for the test.
Thanks, Moses. I think that's
No
everything
problem.
now.
All right.
If
Well, I'm sure
anybody
questions
thinks of
usually come up after the fact, so please feel free to
exactly.
reach out if you have any additional questions.
Thank you very much for joining us, everybody. We will now close the webinar and we hope to host you on a next one. Have a lovely day.
Thanks, everybody. Cheers.